Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's get started with our second speaker. Our second speaker is Dr. Jonathan Larson. So Dr. Larson is an extension professor for the University of Kentucky who provides insect expertise for people dealing with issues in urban landscapes, turf grasses, nursery crops, greenhouses, and households, basically everything. So he teaches across a variety of platforms using social media, videos, and traditional extension publications. So he's one of the co-hosts of Arthro-Pod, an entomology podcast. So Dr. Larson, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. All right. I appreciate the opportunity to join you here today. I'm very excited to chat with you just about some of the different insects that live here in Kentucky, share some of our experiences, and to talk about things that we do here to try and help deal with those problems. And maybe even talk to you a little bit about some of the new types of invasive species that may come your way here in the very near future. I do have to say, I feel a little bit like the student talking to the masters here. I live and work in Kentucky in turf. We're called the Bluegrass State. We're very famous for our grass and our pastures on our sports fields and different places. But I have to say that in terms of the challenges that we face here, if you look at this recent golf course industry survey that was conducted just a little while ago, where they polled people across the US and Canada. They were looking for national and international statistics. They talked a lot about golf and what kinds of things pop up there. You can see that insects, my world, entomology ranked behind diseases and weeds quite a bit. But if we zoom in on some of the other information that they were able to accrue, they looked at the Northeast, Southeast, Central, and Western states. And there were lots of key differences here. So I just kind of want to highlight the Southeast, since that's the audience I'm speaking with today. People that responded to this survey said that they on average treated 58 acres of turf with insecticides. Their annual insecticide budget was over $16,500, and they had about 4 applications a year. If you look at the top 5 potential insect damage concerns in the Southeast, armyworms, which I heard from Shimat earlier, were a big problem down there this year. Cutworms, mole crickets, white grubs, Bermuda grass mites, all of those kind of pop up. If we zoom in on where I live, it's a very different situation. We treat less turf on average in the central portion of the U.S. We have a much smaller insecticide budget, as you can see here, and we're about 2.8 annual insecticide applications, so about 1.2 less than what you all are doing down there. And our top 5 potential insect concerns here look quite a bit different as well. White grubs remain king. I'll talk about those here in a moment. We deal with a lot of ant problems, but in a very different way than you do. We have a lot of golf course green and golf course tea ants that pop up in turf. We deal with cutworms and armyworms occasionally. We have had a slight outbreak of armyworms this year, but nothing like what 2021 presented and nothing like what you deal with down there. And then some people in the survey also reported sod webworms. I will say that I very rarely hear or talk about sod webworms in the state of Kentucky. So we've sort of seemingly had this force field around the state for a long time. I would sort of attribute that to one major factor, which is Kentucky is historically a climatic transition zone. Kentucky is a cultural transition zone as well. It can never seemingly fully decide if it's Southern or if it's Midwestern. You can get both sweet and unsweetened tea. We do sell grits here, so we got some Southern heritage, but we also have a lot of Northern sort of traits to the state, and that includes our climate. We get colder winters. We have a fall here, and this looks a little bit different than some of those Southeastern states, and it impacts what we deal with up here. As a result, we have historically dealt mainly with the white grub complex. This is our number one pest in turf plantings, be they the home lawn situation, a golf course, a sports field. I've been getting really interesting calls this year in regards to grubs, not about the usual ones, but about some sort of extra special spicy ones. Usually, when we talk about the white grubs rogue gallery, we're talking about these 4 insects with heavy emphasis on the 2 on the farthest right here. So we would talk about green June beetles, May June beetles, mass chafers, and then Japanese beetles. You can see the grub form, the immature form beneath each of the adult forms here. The green June beetle being the biggest and beefiest of them, the May June beetle falling in second place, and then the masked chafer and Japanese beetle looking fairly similar unless you perform a closer inspection. If you're ever really curious about what white grubs you're finding in the turf, I would encourage you to kind of flip them over and look at the posterior tip of their abdomen. That's a fancy scientific way of saying you're going to look at their hairy grub butts, and you're going to look and see what kinds of patterns you can see emerge. We call it the Raster pattern. This is the series of hairs that are found on the tips of these grubs. And in those hairs, in those spines, different patterns will show up for different species. So the green June beetle has kind of a block letter I. The May June beetle looks like somebody's left their zipper open on their pants. It's these kind of pulling apart spines that you see here. Then we have the masked chafer. Whether it's the northern or southern species, there is no pattern. It's just a hairy butt. Maybe some of you sympathize with that. Then we've got the Japanese beetle. The Japanese beetle has a letter V hidden within its raster pattern. You can see it in the real image and then in the cartoon diagram as well. That V stands for victory, of course, because they seemingly defeat us at many different turns. So this is how you tell the difference between these grubs. Typically not super important. It's well enough to know that you're dealing with a white grub problem because the solutions don't tend to be species specific. That can change though, depending on what life cycle we're talking about with these grubs. So most of the grubs that I just enumerated to you are going to have an annual life cycle. They start life as an egg that the mother will lay, usually in the midsummer point. Tends to be pretty consistent across the eastern side of the United States. They're out and about June and July looking to lay those eggs. So the mom lays the eggs, the grub hatches out, they feed throughout the rest of the summer. As summer ends, the grub will cease feeding and it will go lower in the soil profile. This is when they're overwintering. They go lower to avoid the frost line wherever it is that they live. And then they will move above the frost line in the spring. They won't really feed then. They may nibble a little bit, but mainly what they're looking to do is pupate and then emerge as an adult. This is an adult masked chafer here. To start the process over again. Very simple life cycle for most of these. That can change if you're talking about something like black turfgrass Ataenius. This is a unique grub, very small grub actually. If you look at it in those images on the right, that's a penny next to them in the soil there. And you can see they would very comfortably fit across Abe Lincoln's beard. They're not a very large and impressive grub, but they can get in high numbers. They'll feed on Kentucky bluegrass, they'll feed on annual bluegrass and bentgrass. If you have any of those cool season species being used, you could end up dealing with these. But up here, we typically keep this in check, but we've had a couple of outbreaks in the last year and a half, I would say, where people have either switched grub products and seen less control with the ones that they switched to, or even worse, they're in areas that are not being treated that then end up having to be treated because that population is going there. They're interesting because they have two generations here in the state of Kentucky, and they overwinter as an adult beetle. We don't see that with many of these scarab type beetles that cause grub problems. They don't tend to overwinter as adults. They tend to be in the soil as a grub. These ones hide out in the soil as an adult. They do that throughout November into March. They fly as early as the midpoint in March, really when spring starts to pop up here. And then they will lay their eggs. There will be a generation that will go through the early part of the summer, then a second flush that goes in the second part of the summer. So it's kind of a double whammy. This occurs both earlier and later than feeding from other common grub species. Here in Kentucky, our advice is usually to get out and spray a grub prevention product between Mother's Day and July 4th. If you follow that, you are going to miss the early window for control, at least for the first generation of BTA. So that could be one of the reasons that we're seeing this shift towards them popping up more, in particular on golf courses. Other grub-related strangeness that we've seen here in Kentucky has involved outbreaks of May and June beetles, and these are happening earlier in the season. These are reports that come in from our county agent level. These folks call me on campus as the specialist, and I try to tag these things down so that we can understand what bugs they're doing in the bluegrass. What we've seen over the last couple of years is that May and June beetles seem to be coming out in April rather than waiting until May. They're starting to encroach on a different month in the calendar. This is really active with outdoor lighting. People are complaining because they're sitting there trying to read. They have the window open because we're starting to enter those warmer months. and they have their outdoor lighting system on as well, or they're sitting there reading by the window and they have a lamp on, these beetles love the light and they will fly directly towards it. Oh, I have to go towards the light. And then ping, they'll fling off the screen, they'll hit windows, and it tends to annoy people quite a bit. The adult stage, there's not a lot that we can do to control, but grub stages, these are something that we could do some sprays for, but it becomes complicated because this has a very exaggerated life cycle in comparison to the other species of grubs. So rather than an annual life cycle or having more than one in 1 year, these actually take 3 years to develop in the soil. So over 3 calendar years, you'll see them slowly grow and mature into adulthood. They overwinter in the ground after the 3rd growing season as an adult so that they can emerge. And again, that usually happens in May and June. The adults will nibble on tree leaves. They cause some skeletonizing damage that looks sort of similar to Japanese beetle, but much less potent. And they're usually coming out in May, sometimes a little later in June. But if things continue to heat up in states like ours, as we kind of lose that climate transition zone stage or description, then we may end up seeing these start to pop out earlier in the season. The other big one that we've heard questions about is the green June beetle. I don't know how many of you deal with these on a regular basis or see them very often at all, but these are big honking beetles, and people tend to not like them for that reason. The grub is also quite big. They're the biggest white grub that we deal with down in the soil. It can be over 1.5 inches long, and the adult is very large and stout. They sound like a bumblebee when they're flying. Their wing beats mimic that sort of sound, and so people think they're being dive bombed by bumblebees. They also have Notre Dame colors, so I'm not a fan. That green and gold mixture sets them apart from many of the other sort of scarab beetles that we see in this neck of the woods because it looks a little more tropical with that metallic sheen. The adults have been noticed very heavily in Kentucky over the last 2 summers in lawns, parks, and pastures. And this has a lot to do with the grub stage. So it behaves very differently than the other grub species. They don't feed directly on turf roots. They actually are a pest because they tunnel through the ground occasionally. And they're so big as they do that, they'll uproot the grass and they can cause what looks a lot like sort of runs from a vertebrate, but they don't necessarily feed directly on the turf. They're looking for organic matter in the soil. So stuff that's accumulated down there, your thatch, all those kinds of things that have kind of gotten down there. Or if you have people who are fertilizing with organic fertilizers that are manure based, or if you have animals in that area, all of that organic matter can also be very attractive to them. Compost can be attractive to them. So we've seen an increase in them sort of flying to those kinds of spots and then laying their eggs. The grubs also startle people. They do occasionally come up at night and they behave very strangely. Instead of using their legs to walk, which a normal organism might do, they instead flop over on their back and they kind of scooch around on their shoulder blades, essentially, trying to get to the places that they need to go. They even have a sort of specialized toughened patch there that helps them to do it. But if you ever see a worm or a grub doing the worm on its back in your backyard, it's most likely this species. So we have been trying to get people to reduce attraction by minimizing thatch layers, avoiding compost and top dressings and manure-based fertilizers. Hopefully that will cut down on problems, but also our usual white grub sprays that we would put down in a lawn sort of in the early part of the year will help to prevent them just as well as the other species. One of the big turf challenges we see in Kentucky right now involves the annual bluegrass weevil. Very interesting pest, in my opinion, because it's a native insect, seemingly as native to the New England area. Up in Connecticut is where it was first sort of reported as a pest, and we have descriptions of it from then and before. So it seems to be a native pest, but it's behaving in many ways like an invasive species. The first issues that we noticed in the United States on golf courses were in Connecticut in 1931, but since then it has been spreading. So it has this kind of evil streak to it, unfortunately, and that's caused a lot of bad news for a lot of different golf course managers. Throughout the 50s and 60s, it has caused a lot of economic damage in New York and New England. In Pennsylvania, it's been long reported as maybe the #1 golf course pest that they contend with. But then after this sort of period of 20 to 30, 35, 40 years, where it seemed contained up in the New England area, In the early 2000s, it started to be found in states like Ohio and Virginia and getting down into North Carolina. As of last year, heading into this year, some of the newest finds include Illinois and then Nebraska. And then lucky all of you, you get to join the club as well. In 2022, it was found in Georgia. I'm not sure of the current distribution down there. I'm not sure what things look like for you right now. I would be interested in hearing that if anybody has anything that they would want to say about it. We've been dealing with this since about 2017, 2018 here in Kentucky. It was first found on a very nice course here in the state that had recently imported sod. So the current theory for much of its movement within the United States boils down to the purchasing of sod from one state that is infested and potentially has this insect hidden in it, and then you import it to the new area and it starts to escape from there. I recognize that something that's called the annual bluegrass weevil may not be of big concern to Georgians. We are talking about cool season turf grasses that are under threat here. But if you have any of them, then of course, this is something you kind of need to be on the lookout for. As for identifying it, it's a rather undistinguished looking weevil, as you see here. Very tiny, only about 3 to 4 millimeters long, very dark in color. It is flecked with gold on its back. As a weevil, it does have an elongated snout in the front, not quite as exquisite as we might see with an acorn weevil, which is the insect on the left there, or even quite as long as the hunting billbug, which we see underneath the annual bluegrass weevil on the right side. You can see those green arrows pointing to the snouts. These are all beetles that just have fancy noses, basically. I sympathize with them. It's tough to have a big nose. People do notice it first and foremost about you. But with this, there is some degradation across species where you see different sizes. An annual bluegrass weevil, while it's present, it's not the most obvious part of their body. Some other species, this is a rice weevil. It has one that sticks out pretty far. There's different areas that the antenna can be placed. For the annual bluegrass weevil, you see the antenna look kind of like a wispy mustache towards the end of the nose. For the hunting billbug, those antennae are instead closer to the face and sort of at the base of the snout, much like we see with the rice weevil. And of course, this leads us to the most famous weevil of them all, Weevil Knievel, who had those antennae closer to the tip of his snout. The annual bluegrass weevil is a beetle, so therefore it goes through complete metamorphosis. It starts life as an egg, it develops through multiple larval instar stages, and then it will pupate before it becomes an adult. You can see that development from this image from Ben McGraw at Penn State University. Dr. McGraw is probably one of the national experts on this insect, maybe even one of the global experts. A lot of people that live in that sort of northern Atlantic area that are entomologists have to contend with this insect. So him, Albrecht Koppenhofer, quite a few others, Pat Vittum, they could offer a wealth of information on this. We in the more southern states, we're learning from them, but also kind of having to apply what they've learned to different climatic zones. But regardless of where it lives, it does go through these grub-like stages that you see here before pupating and becoming an adult. Unlike white grubs, annual bluegrass weevil larvae are legless. Most weevil larvae are. If you look at them, they look like a puffed up piece of rice, basically, with kind of a reddish orange head capsule. They're much smaller than most white grub species, except for that black turfgrass Ataenius. There is sometimes a confusion there, but again, you just kind of turn them around and turn them over. You notice they don't have any legs. You can feel fairly confident you're looking at some sort of weevil larva. For us in this state, we have been adapting what we've learned from the Northeast to better understand kind of where it lives and how it overwinters in our state. And what we're learning from there and from North Carolina, who's been dealing with this for a little bit longer than we have, is that they overwinter in kind of natural areas. So in woodlots and naturalized roughs, overgrown areas that are on the golf course, they hide out in the leaf litter and the log litter there. They wake up as early as March. They begin to feed and mate, and then egg laying occurs here from April into May. This is a chart from the New York metropolitan area, so up in NYC, just showing the way that those areas have seen the insect develop and kind of the timings. One thing that I want to point out to you are the indicator plant blooms that they've pointed to. This is really helpful phenological information because it helps to translate New York City data to Kentucky data to Georgia data. Basically, this means that the growing degree days for dogwood bloom coincides very well with the L1 stage of the annual bluegrass weevil. We also can see that forsythia, if you've got any of that growing around, when forsythia is half gold and half green, that tends to be the time of the year when the peak adult emergence is occurring from the overwintering stage. There are multiple generations in a year with this pest, which complicates insecticide application, complicates management, but there are ways of timing this. There are things like Weevil track from Syngenta that you can check in with to see where things are going. As the name implies, they're primarily a pest of Poa annua or annual bluegrass, which in of itself is considered a weed. So some people in the past have asked, well, why isn't this insect beneficial? Why isn't this biological control for a plant we consider a weed? And unfortunately, the reason is because if they run out of that, or if the annual bluegrass is growing in creeping bent, they will often switch from those hosts to the creeping bent and start to feed. There are reports of damage to perennial ryegrass from other universities and their extension publications, but it doesn't seem as common. So once they feed on that creeping bent grass, they create this kind of thinned out area. So they're often, the symptoms are not noticed until later in the summer, but this is going to be seen on the collars, on the approaches to the green, sometimes on the tee, occasionally on the edge of the fairway. It can be confused for pathogens. We have a lot of people that confuse this for water stress. We're entering a dry part of the year usually, and the annual bluegrass, the creeping bent grass, it's getting wimpy. It needs more water. No matter how much water they apply, though, there's no roots left to absorb it. And so irrigations doesn't work. And then they end up checking for pests, which is when it's more revealed. Oops. So as the damage accumulates, the multiple generations will sort of congeal, and you'll get these kind of pockmarked looking areas, brownish spots with really wiped out areas that are very thin. So it starts with this kind of straw yellow color, and then as it goes, there's just these patches of areas where there's no grass left growing. We can sample for this through a variety of ways, but the easiest way is a soap flush. This is a former cooperator that I worked with at a public course in northern Kentucky. And what we were doing here is just mixing together 1 tablespoon of dish soap, liquid dish soap, into a gallon or more of water. And then you kind of agitate it and stir it up. And then you pour the sudsy mixture out. I would encourage you to get citrus-based dish soaps. Historically, these have been the best at driving insects out of the ground. That citrus smell, I almost said flavor, but we don't eat soap. That smell is the result of an essential oil that's in there, essentially. And that helps to agitate these insects and kind of push them out. So pour on the area of concern and bordering spots where you see Poa annua, wait 30 to 60 seconds, pour it again, and then watch the area for about 5 minutes. The weevils will pop up in the suds. They're very easy to pick out and then count. I advise you to not just sample one area if you're really concerned about this insect. We usually do 6 1 square foot areas, and we take samples over the course of about a half hour to 45 minutes. Some people accidentally monitor for annual bluegrass weevil when they do their mowing. If they've got their reel mowers and they've got a catch on there, if they go to dump the clippings, many people will notice, oh my gosh, there's all these bugs crawling around in here. They freak out. I've had people ask if these were ticks getting into the grass and coming for them. But and they look closely, they'll notice that there are all of these annual bluegrass weevils that are kind of swimming around in the clippings. And then they go and do the soap sampling to further reveal the possible population. We also sample for these through what's called the Tug Test. You may have heard of this before if you've learned about bill bugs or weevils in other situations. As they feed, they're feeding internally. They're weakening sort of the basal stem of the plant, and there's sawdust that comes out of there. And when you pull on it, it becomes very brittle and hollowed out. So when you tug on it, it just slides out from the soil. It may snap kind of at the base as well, but usually what it feels like is that whenever you pull your straw out of your McDonald's cup, it feels a lot like that level of resistance. It just kind of slides right out of the ground, and then you'll notice the sawdust-like material inside. If you want to talk more about annual bluegrass weevil, if you're interested, I could chat with you in the Q&A section, but I didn't include a lot of management because that would take a lot of time. We could do a whole hour just on that one. I also wasn't entirely sure how widely distributed it was in your state. So I wanted to share some other things that have popped up in Kentucky that you may hear about as well. So over the last 2 years, I've been inundated with questions about this slimy looking organism that you see on the left. It's called a hammerhead worm. Hammerhead worms are land planarians, so they look quite strange. It looks like something out of Star Trek, maybe Star Wars, but usually people equate it with Star Trek. It looks like something that maybe wants to get into your ear and take over your brain, but they're just very weird looking. And we get a lot of these questions, and they do center around turf or landscapes where people are out working in the landscape, people are on the golf course, and they see this thing kind of coming out of a wooded area. They're about 12 inches long, so they do frighten folks. They are non-segmented worms. So earthworms, which you're probably way more familiar with, if you look closely at an earthworm's skin, you should notice these ridges, right? They have these sort of bands across their body. This worm is like one evolutionary step behind that. They don't have that segmentation. They're completely smooth. And in fact, they actually eat earthworms. These don't damage plants. They're not causing harm to turf or trees. They're predators. They consume earthworms, snails, and slugs by and large. To do that, they will inject a neurotoxin, which people will read a lot about on the internet and become very frightened of. You could have them discovered by golfers or employees. People then read about them online or see it in the news. This tetrodotoxin that they use to hunt their prey is the same thing that's in pufferfish. So that frightens people to hear about. They can produce fear because of their ability to vector rat lungworm. Rat lungworm is an internal parasite that humans can get. If you ever read about it, you'll hear really tragic stories of people who they ate a snail on a dare and then they ended up in a coma for the rest of their life, basically. It can be very problematic when humans are infected. So all of that means that people are freaked out. They see these big slimy aliens. They read that they're full of poison and venom. They want to know what we're going to do about it. The other thing that they'll hear is how they're essentially immortal. Some people, there's actually a little cartoon comic strip online that calls this the land chovy. And they talk about how disgusting it is because you can't kill them. People's first reaction is usually to try and chop them up. Unfortunately, chopping them up is the main way that they reproduce, is to snap into pieces. And so when you chop them, you actually help them to make new versions of themselves. So they're not immortal. You can kill them. The biggest thing that we have to combat is that fear. Those negative effects that I've pointed out would only really occur if you ate them. I don't know how many of you are willing to slurp one of these up like a spaghetti noodle on a dare, but it's really not advised. People can touch them and suffer no ill effects. This image that you see here in the center actually is from the social media site Reddit, where somebody posted this to a subreddit and said, I heard these are venomous. Is it okay to hold them? And everybody in the comments was basically like, well, apparently because you're holding it and you took a picture and posted it here to Reddit and you seem to be okay. We don't advise people handle them. If they're going to pick them up, they should wear some sort of gloves. But if you accidentally graze one, it's not going to harm you. It's interesting because they're weak to very similar things to slugs and snails. You can kill them with salt or with vinegar. Rather than sort of pouring salt on them while they're on the ground and then salting the earth, we tend to tell people to put on a pair of sort of leak-proof gloves, so more of a vinyl than a leather, maybe more of a research level type glove, but you can pick them up and put them in a Ziploc bag, or you can pick them up with a stick and put them in a Ziploc bag. But once they're in that container, you can pour salt in there or vinegar in them, and you can watch them dissolve to your heart's content and be sure that you have destroyed them. I'll end today by talking about a couple of invasive species that we're dealing with either currently or very soon to deal with here in Kentucky that haven't made their way down to Georgia yet. But I think they're things that you've probably been hearing about and should be concerned with. Spotted lanternfly is a big one. I know that may be hard to hear since it's wearing University of Georgia colors with that kind of bright red on the back and the black and white mixed together. But this invasive pest, despite its beauty, it does cause a lot of issues here in the United States. We have recently, within about a year, had our first confirmation. We're currently waiting on a few more confirmations, new counties to add to the list. But as of right now, this is only known in one county in Kentucky. You can see it's getting closer and closer to you down there in Georgia. It is in the Carolinas. It's been found in Tennessee. It's even gotten out west. There was a find in Iowa, but I think that was later discovered to be less of a colony and more of just an accidental discovery. There's some in Chicago. They're expanding in Indiana. You can see the kind of battleground area, though, is Pennsylvania. This seems to be a state that's heavily infested. That's because this is where this pest started, was in central Pennsylvania, and it's been spreading from there ever since. This is what we call a true bug. It's a type of hemipteran. Hemipterans, the true bugs, they're special compared to other insects because of parts of the ways that parts of their body are put together. So if we look at this collage here, there's a cicada, a stink bug, some aphids, a bed bug, a plant hopper, and some scale insects. All of these are true bugs. There's a lot of diversity here. They feed on different things. They look very different from one another, but they're all united by their piercing, sucking mouth part. So under this aphid's head, you can see its needle-like mouth, which is inserted into the plant to feed. This spotted lanternfly also has a needle-like mouth, which they fold up under their head. Theirs looks a little more wicked in terms of length. This adaptation ensures that these types of insects, they only consume liquids. They're only consuming sugary sap that they're pulling out of a plant. Spotted lanternfly has been in the news a lot, but it's really an interesting invasive species, especially if you compare it to something like Japanese beetle or emerald ash borer. Those insects, they cause really obvious, really widespread damage, and plants often die because of those pests. This insect doesn't do that. We don't have a lot of trees that are going to die because of spotted lanternfly. It's true that they can cause damage to lots of plants and that they can breed and establish really big populations, but we're not going to see whole streets denuded of trees because of this insect like we did with emerald ash borer. So they do feed on quite a few plants. They have over 70 different hosts, including maples, apples, cherries, birches, roses, different berry plants. The big ones, though, are tree of heaven and then walnuts and grapes. These are the plants that could also be most affected by spotted lanternfly. Tree of heaven, we don't really care about, right? That's an invasive species itself. They're both from the same area in Asia. So it's like love from the old country that's been rekindled here in North America. They found one another and they were able to, one was able to start feeding on the other. Interestingly, grapes and walnuts, these plants that we grow for agriculture here in the US, they can also be impacted by spotted lanternfly over successive years of heavy infestation. As they feed, they pull that sap out. It causes the plant to kind of wilt and yellow. But the most conspicuous symptom with this insect is honeydew. Just like with aphids, they make this sugary butt juice that kind of leaks out of them, and it drips all over the plant that they're feeding on and the plants that are kind of underneath. And as that happens, that will also recruit black sooty mold. Black sooty mold is a fungus that will grow in the sugary material, and then you get these kind of patches of black, usually just on leaves. With spotted lanternfly, the areas that are covered with this black fungus can be very big. This understory under this infested tree has basically been killed out by sooty mold because of the honeydew that's been dripping down. These populations, they go up and they go down. They, unfortunately, though, drive people kind of crazy. People don't want to be exposed to this. If you look at that tree on the left there, all of those kind of bumps and ridges are bugs. Those are spotted lanternflies. This tree on the right here, this is a little video that we'll jump into. This is somebody going up to their tree in their backyard. I mean, that looks like a deer's ear that's full of ticks, right? It's just completely coated in insects. This might be nightmare fuel for some of you, but that doesn't look like a lot of fun. You'll notice the swing next to the other infested tree. There ain't nobody playing on that swing or on that wagon next to it. People often stop going outside because of this insect. We've had reports from back east of people golfing less, people going to parks less because of this insect. In terms of management, we do have some strategies and some options. This might be something that Shimat will have to talk to you all more about in the near future. I'm not sure if you have an emergency label already for dinotephuron, but that would be one of the main ways that we would treat some of these trees to kill insects as they feed on there. But there's also just going to be a lot of monitoring and a lot of kind of public awareness with this particular insect. As we kind of round the corner into home, the other pest that I wanted to talk about that's invasive, that's not quite in Kentucky, but is very, very close, it may pose a hazard to you all as well, is called the box tree moth. The box tree moth, I like to say it has boxwoods kind of shrubs shaking in their pots here in this state because they are a huge pest of boxwoods. There are multiple counties in southwestern Ohio, very close to Cincinnati, which is very close to the border with Kentucky, that are infested. We grow a lot of boxwoods in Kentucky and we plant a lot of them. I often joke that it's the state tree here. It just seems like everybody, when you get a house, you get the front door key and you get a boxwood to plant out front. They're a very easy shrub to shape. And as a result, people do like them. They tend to be very sturdy. This pest will take care of that, though. This pest could kill many of them. It's already caused a lot of widespread devastation to boxwoods in Europe. If you look on this map on the left, it started in the Germany area and then expanded from there. And over the course of about 9 years, almost all of Europe was infested. And when it gets into a new area, these boxwoods on the right show you what they do. They basically shred them and then get down to the base of them, and they can girdle them and kill them pretty quickly. The caterpillar stage is the problematic stage. They primarily feed on the leaves, but when they run out of leaves, they can attack the trunk. They are slightly hairy, much less hairy than something like a tent caterpillar or a spongy moth caterpillar or a woolly bear, but they do have some hairs that pop up. They have a very distinct color pattern of yellow, lime green, black, and white. They look like a can of mellow yellow. There's no real other way to describe them. I think that they have that brand sort of classic color pattern on the side of them. In the adult stage, they hold their wings out in a sort of fan-like orientation. They usually are brown on the edges with white in the middle and then kind of white commas on the edge. There is a color variant that is all brown, on the other hand. This insect can be confused with another moth that looks like this called the melonworm moth. But those commas that you see kind of hidden in the border, those are what help us to separate them out. It's not currently clear what we're going to see in Kentucky. We're kind of watching Ohio to see how many generations they get and how often they're dealing with this. We do know that they overwinter in a hibernaculum. They overwinter as a semi-mature larva in this kind of sleeping bag made of silk. And then they emerge in the spring to start feeding again before they pupate and become an adult. It's most likely that we're going to see 2 generations, maybe 3 generations a year here in Kentucky. This would line up with Europe, but we're still kind of waiting for it to get here so that we can figure that out. Unlike other boxwood pests, these actually produce a nest that they hide in. I don't want to call it a tent, like a tent caterpillar, but they do sew some of the leaves together, creating this kind of silken area where they can hide in. When they feed on the leaves, they eat all of the green tissue and they leave the midrib behind. We call it the curlicue. We see all these kind of curlicues spread throughout the plant. This is a little bit different than boxwood leaf miner or boxwood psyllid, which create slightly more crispy looking damage where the leaf is intact. Salt that we put down for ice removal here can also be easily absorbed by boxwoods. Winter kill can occur. So we use that silk and the curlicues to separate this out from the psyllid, which causes the cupping and curling that you see in this lower image, and then the leaf miner, which causes that kind of orange potato chip look to the leaves as they feed between the top and bottom layer, and then just the wholesale death of the plant with this kind of browning on the other side. There are options for control, might involve things like a celiprin, which we're very familiar with in turf, and a few other products. BT would be an organic option if you were interested, but there will be control options. It's just going to be a matter of figuring out what to do in each state. I will end with saying that while I've talked about these pests that aren't quite here or are just starting here and aren't in your state necessarily yet, we have also received a gift from the south. Most of our problems seem to be coming from the north and then impacting our state, but we have recently become one of the fire ant states. Kentucky, for many, many years, was always held up as the state that they would never reach. If you look through some of the fire ant literature, there was a line drawn around southern Tennessee in the early 1900s, and they'll never cross this line. And then they crossed that line, and then they drew a line on the bottom of Kentucky, and they said, oh, they're never going to cross this line. And now they have. We are dealing mainly with the hybrid fire ant, which I'm not sure if you all get stung by more often than that, or the red or the black, but the red and black species can hybridize and create a more cold-tolerant variety, and that is what we're seeing mostly here in Kentucky. This is all down in southeastern Kentucky. Down in if you wanted a bigger city like the Monticello, Kentucky area, But Whitley County is one of the sort of hot spots. Then McCreary, Knox, and Bell, and Laurel counties. These are all very close to Tennessee, which it turns out after we started finding these, they started to figure out that many of their northern counties were also infested, and they weren't quite aware of it. There is one trouble spot in Louisville, Kentucky, our largest city. We freaked out when this was reported, but it turned out it was a family that moved to Louisville from Mississippi, and the dad actually knew exactly what had happened. He did call us and tell us, but then he killed it. He took care of it. We keep it on our map just in case we need to go back and retreat, but we do believe that will be wiped out and they won't get going there. So this is something that we look to you all to learn from. We know that you've been dealing with it for quite some time. I'm sure many of you have horror stories of kneeling down on mounds or tripping and falling on them. It's something that we're teaching Kentuckians about, and they are not pleased. They have had many complaints, and they want us to go to the bug board and see if we can get these sent back down south. But unfortunately, I think they're just going to keep spreading here in the state. With that, I again appreciate the opportunity to speak to some folks down in Georgia. So thank you, Dr. Joseph. Thanks to everybody, Mr. Brayman, that helped with everything today. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate for a wonderful overview of invasive bugs that's coming on your way.
You told me I had to get them home before 5, so I was sticking to it. I promised I would.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much for that. So if you have questions again, use that Q&A box and type your question, and Dr. Larson will be more than happy to answer those. Yeah. Anyway, one thing was new to me is that annual bluegrass weevil that you just pointed out in Georgia. It wasn't news to me. I didn't know.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. You got another bug to deal with.
But whatever I understand is that it's not, we have some bentgrass and Connecticut bluegrass that grows. I mean, not that much, but it's there in the northern part of the state. So there is something to keep an eye on now.
Yes. I wish you luck. It's a very tough pest to monitor for. You kind of have to get a feel for it over a growing season or two to figure out how to monitor for. And we spent 2 years, we were never able to get a larva. We could find adults, but we could never find their immatures. It was very frustrating.
Yeah, interesting. Looks like there is a question here.
Have I fished with the big worm?
Yeah.
No, I don't know how well that would work. I think that neurotoxin might impact the fish. So no, I haven't put that one on a hook. That's an interesting question, though.
Yeah. Yeah, so take a moment and you have some time. So if you have questions, just write, type, in the chat. It should be okay too. Oh, looks like we have a question.
Okay.
So what is the common treatment methods for spotted lanternfly?
So usually what we see are contact products. If you're trying to treat them on a plant and they're annoying people, it's a pyrethroid spray usually. So bifenthrin, things like that. Apply it to the surface of them and on the plant that they're living on. As they crawl through it, they'll die. To get a little more specialized, we do inject trees with dinoteffuron as well. So this is either a soil injection or a trunk injection to systemically move that product throughout the tree. This is frequently done with tree of heaven to create a trap tree. So that's their preferred host. They want to feed on that plant. And if they find it and you've injected it, it'll kill many, many, many of them. It doesn't wipe them out. It doesn't stop the invasion necessarily, but it can be helpful if you're looking to sort of reduce them on a golf course or if you've got a wedding facility nearby and they're kind of flying around. There are complaints about that. Those are 2 things that we can do.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on that, we don't have this bug in Georgia. That doesn't mean it's not reported. Doesn't mean it's not there. So you all saw the pictures of these adults and things like that. This is the time you'll see adults out.
Yes, we just finished with National Tree Check Month back in August. That's when people are told by the U.S. Forest Service and others to go out and look for the adult stage. It's the biggest and most obvious. It's almost 2 inches long, bright red color when they jump and fly off of a tree. So it's very obvious what you've got when you see it. There are some things that get confused for it, some different leopard moths that have the same spots, but none of them have the mixture of spots and sort of alligator skin on the front wings that this one does.
Yeah, so if you see it, please report it to your county agent that would be a good place to start, and let them know that you're seeing something or send a sample. They can also take a look at that. Yeah, interesting. So many things are coming north from north. So I understand the box tree moth. We have a quarantine in place in those counties where it's detected in all the states north. So, do you think that's the quarantine is working or preventing, or what are your thought about that?
I think it will help. It helped in Canada. It was up in Ontario, Canada for quite some time before it broke that quarantine and came south. And so I think it will definitely help to delay it. I think it'll help that as we learn more about it in the northern states and then whatever other states it infests, we'll be able to give insecticide timings. I think one thing important to point out between the US and Europe is they don't have access to a lot of the same chemistries that we do here. And so their invasion will probably end up looking very different from what we see here in the United States. There's already been some behavioral differences noted in Ohio. It seems like shade covered boxwoods are maybe more at risk. So if you've got them growing under a bigger magnolia or something to that effect, it might be a problem. Luckily, they're not going to get into the hedges at the football stadium, though. That's privet, right?
Yeah, there's that's good to know about that. And one other question I was wondering was the temperature, because up in north things are a little bit colder and cooler compared to northern states. So what is your thought about that? Whether they will survive in south?
I think you're onto something there. I do think that there will be a point that they can't cross going south, and it might be right around Georgia. There have been people who said, yeah, this will probably never be an issue down in Florida, for example, but I'm not sure where that line will be. You have to think about sort of European climates and that matching up over here. But if they're surviving in Ohio, I think they'll survive with us. I think they'll probably get to Tennessee. But after that, things do get quite murky. It'll either be lots of generations in a year, or it won't be able to handle those higher temps.
Interesting. Yeah, looks like we don't have any more questions.
That's perfect. That means that we nailed it, right?
Yeah.
Thank you
That
again.
means you're good.
And
Thank you so much, Dr. Larson, for a wonderful talk today. And it was very concise and right on, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm pretty sure their audience liked it, and they learned a lot from you.
Good. That's what we do this for.
Yeah. Thank you so
Catch
much.
up later.
Richie, you want to talk about how to deal with the sign-in sheets and things like that?
Sure, Shimat. I'll talk for a minute more about that. Folks, I know a couple of you have already gotten them in because I'm seeing them come in the email here. Make sure that you get us your sign-in sheets, like Shimat said. Send them to us. That email address is at gtbop@uga.edu. And if you need to mail it to us, our physical mailing address is at the top of that sign-in sheet. And once again, just make sure that we get your license number and a nice big printed copy of your name on your sign-in sheet. And lastly, for anyone who needed to call in on their phone, use the phone for audio, make sure that before we leave the webinar today, you go ahead and let us know in the chat that you did that you used the phone for audio, and put your phone number in there. That way we know to line that phone number in the Zoom record up with the number on your sign-in sheet. And folks, we'll see everyone.
Richie, I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
There is one question about what is the title of this webinar?
Sure. So for today's webinar, our title is, hold on just a second. I've got it in the chat, but let me just go ahead and pull this up here. Yeah, our title for today's webinar is Green GTBOP Webinar Series, Thursday, September 19th, 2024. Now, the important part there, the most important part is our date. And that's because this is one of those months where we run several webinars. So because we get so many sign-in sheets, all in pretty short order. It's really important that we're able to differentiate yours from the sign-in sheets of a different webinar. So I'll go ahead and drop that in the chat again for anyone who needs it. All right, folks, we'll leave this open for just a few minutes longer so folks have a chance to stick their phone number in the chat if they use their phone for audio. And that's it from us. So Dr. Joseph, thanks once again, and
Thank you so
everyone else. We'll see you in November for our last GTBOP webinar of the year.
Exactly. Thank you.